In our next session, we'll be discussing how we can not only build up charging infrastructure, but also how we can ensure that the infrastructure is supplied with green energy. To cover this topic, a little introduction, we have a video prepared.
Overall car sales in Europe dropped by 23.8% in 2020. Yet, sales of plug-in vehicles rose by an impressive 137%. In fact, a recent study estimates that the number of EVs in Europe will rise from 2 million in 2020 to 40 million by 2030. Sufficient infrastructure is required to accommodate this rapid growth. In Germany alone, the number of charging points must increase by around 700,000 within the next 9 years. And the work does not stop there. Assuming an EV share of 30% by 2030, the EU expects that EVs will make up about 5% of overall electricity demand, up from just 0.03% in 2014. This will pose new challenges for grids, both in residential areas as well as in the proximity of main traffic routes. But simply deploying copper won't get the job done. Charging infrastructure must be properly integrated into the grid to enable load forecasting and balancing, and to supply the infrastructure with green energy. This requires smart technology to make EV charging more intelligent, scalable, and efficient. Dynamic load management, for example, avoids overloads, enables increases in electric vehicles without expensive grid extensions, and saves money on grid tariffs. Widespread adoption of e-mobility also calls for a collaborative effort between energy providers, grid operators, and charging infrastructure operators within a rapidly changing and growing sector. But the question remains, how will e-mobility develop in the future, and how can it be achieved at scale?
To answer these questions and go into more detail into this really interesting topic, we have 3 experts with us today. And this will be a slightly different format where they will each present for around 10 minutes on a topic that, from their perspective, and then at the end we'll have a Q&A altogether. First up, we have Rob Labinski, who is the Head of Electrification at Octopus Energy in the UK, working to design new market propositions with large-scale fleets and corporate partners. Rob has been working at the forefront of smart grid management and optimization for 10 years and is now helping to develop new solutions for a carbon zero future with Octopus. Thanks for joining us, Rob.
Hi, thanks, Greta.
And now we'll give you the chance to present your topic and then we'll move on to the other speakers after that.
Brilliant, thank you very much. I'll just share my screen. Yeah, thanks very much, everyone. My name's Rob Labinski. I'm Head of Electrification at Octopus Energy Group. And to abbreviate what I do, it can be kind of shortened to green fleets and renewable heat. And just a quick overview of who Octopus Energy are. We were launched in 2016 in order to disrupt and fix a broken energy market. We have people focused and technology led. And that's kind of key to us. Technology is first, and we've built a proprietary system, Kraken, with big data, machine learning, and a differentiated business model. And now that business is now worth $2 billion. We've got 9 companies in 6 countries across 4 continents, and we've done that all in 5 years. So we've got a good view on the EV space, from everything from EV leasing, renewable generation, to hydrogen as a service, our global research centre for net zero, and all underpinned by this Kraken platform that we've now completed 16 energy company migrations to date. And I think the latest, which was E.ON Next, is a really exciting one. We migrated 2.2 million customers in 11 months. And put that into context, the last data migration that E.ON took place took them 11 years. So data and information and technology is unlocking the green energy market. And we've got this broad sector understanding of EV, 2 million customers on energy supply, 17 million customers globally migrating onto Kraken. A quarter of all new EV drivers in the United Kingdom choose Octopus as an energy supplier. Charging your EV with Octopus is about 75% cheaper than the wholesale average market price in the UK. We supply energy to a third of the charge point operators in the UK, with 15 to 20 of those networks joining the Octopus Electric Juice network in 2021, and a total of about 55,000 charge points across Octopus Electric Juice network in Europe. And then in terms of behavioural change, which is going to be key to the adoption of renewable energy, our agile EV customers shift 7% of their peak load into off-peak periods versus their behaviour before they joined Octopus. And we also lease 100% electric vehicles and install EV charge points. So we've got a really good, broad understanding of the entire ecosystem for energy. And in order for us to reach a zero carbon planet, road transport, we all are aware of this, must transform, and quickly. Europe's 300 million cars generate 25% of its greenhouse emissions. And if you look in the B2B sector, fleets are actually responsible for half of that. And then we've got this massive growth in the sector by 2030, from 1,200% growth increase in EVs expected in Europe. 30% of global passenger vehicles will be electric by 2030. EV100 is going to double the number of EVs on the road on their own, 4.8 million committed, and there's a 24 times increase in fleet vehicles projected to electrify, with buses leading the way at 40% and cars second with 18%. So all of this massive shift and desire and movement from businesses and individuals into e-mobility is going to create a big strain on the system. And actually, charge point infrastructure is lagging behind. And I think we've heard these arguments before. EV drivers are willing to do the switch, but they complain about a lot of things: high capital cost, supply chain difficulties, and most often lack of charge points or intermittent and unreliable technology. Range anxiety is gone. Charge anxiety is the hot topic at the moment, especially in the United Kingdom. So the message is clear. We need to deliver a reliable and seamless charging experience in order to successfully help that entire infrastructure transition. And so governments all over Europe have incentivized and underpinned, from charge point grants to low emission vehicle subsidies, to ensure that people adopt that technology now. And that's accelerated installations of at home, office and on-street charging. We've seen hubs and e-forecourts pop up recently as well across Europe. But in the UK, especially, national coverage is still quite patchy, and charge points remain reliable, underutilised, and in most cases unprofitable. And then if we look at on a global scale, charging infrastructure has doubled in the last 3 years, but regions are being left behind. For example, in Europe, 75% of charge points are only located in 4 key countries. So the problem that we're facing is, and the opportunity is very large, and it's global. There are multi-billion, trillion-pound industries crashing into each other at this point in time: technology, energy, and automotive. And a significant opportunity awaits, companies that can forge a more financially sustainable path with a new systems-led thinking. And so, we're here to talk about how do we do that at scale. Well, actually, from an Octopus perspective, there's kind of 3 kind of levers that we can pull in order to help e-mobility scale towards 2030. The first is driver user experience. The second is the way in which the energy markets are changed and opened up in order to create new opportunities. And finally, infrastructure. So driver user experience needs to be underpinned by interoperability and simplicity. We believe legislation needs to be able to support the democratization of energy, and also community energy models. Local generation, local consumption needs to be supported. And finally, infrastructure, we need to embrace co-location, embrace time of use, intelligent tariffs, real-time control. That will help us get over some of the key barriers we're seeing in terms of grid infrastructure and constraints and connections. And that also should be underpinned by a shared economy. And that's all before we see autonomous vehicles arrive on our roads, which is really exciting. So if we drill into user experience, historically, especially in the United Kingdom, there's the three kind of areas of this. There's a mobility service provider, the charge point operator, and the physical charge point on the ground as well. And historically, charge point networks have been built from an organization as a full stack service. They're in land grab mode, and they, early closed networks are on the ground, and customer experience, and actually historically in each of these areas, has been relatively poor. But these organizations have been able to build customer loyalty through small USPs, for example, like having the biggest network, or being closest to the home of the driver that chooses you. And I think that where we are today is that's changed slightly. So operations and maintenance are now being pulled out. CPOs and mobility service providers are separating out, and these mobility service provider experts are emerging that then enhance that customer experience. And so we're seeing a shift from, I'm loyal to this network, to actually becoming more from, I want to be able to buy this car and get access to a multiple group of networks, or I'm a fleet manager and I have a fuel card and I want to be able to send my drivers all over all over Europe on any network and have that simplified and built in front of me. And then that will continue to change in the future. We'll see charge point networks open up entirely. Networks want to maximize their visibility to consumers, so you'll be able to pay in almost every possible way rather than trying to own the customer experience. Tap pay, join a network on a roaming platform, loyalty schemes, etc. And consumers will be focused on ease of use and simplification of payments, with the path of least resistance and convenience being the most valued. And then what's most hilarious about all of this is the minute that we move to an autonomous vehicle model, then that entire charging infrastructure problem that becomes totally invisible to the driver. So we have this, sweeping change across driver preferences and barriers becoming down through interoperability and roaming capabilities and ease of use. And then once we get to autonomous vehicles, that whole problem will disappear entirely because the vehicles will go and solve that themselves. The next piece for us is the EV markets. We want local energy markets, energy produced locally on our roofs, over our car parks, on our businesses, consumed locally on the same network. In order to minimize losses over transmission, you lose a lot of energy potential when you cross over a transformer, and then we also need to see those systems being totally automated and aligned with the availability of renewable energy on that local grid. So intelligent management and optimization of charging is going to be key to unlock scale in this environment, and also give the distribution network operators and the TSOs the confidence to allow large amounts of this infrastructure to happen on their grids. And then we'll see distributed assets across the community, peer-to-peer trading. You can see the price of energy on Octopus Agile every half hour. You can shift your power in real consumption. You can, in the future, you should be able to trade energy from your mobile phone with your neighbor. The democratization of energy will come from communication and from ownership as well. And then finally, we wanted to touch on infrastructure before I finish. And we need to think about the system as a much more integrated system. So linking charging environments, fleet depots, bus depots, charging forecourts, hubs, they need to link together into a much more integrated energy system. And the legislation in the energy market needs to open up in order for sleeving and energy credits from between sites to be more accessible and easier. But we'll also see those individual locations. For example, having 100 buses, you need a 9 megawatt connection to charge 100 buses. So it's an ideal place to co-locate renewable heat for district heating systems, battery storage on the roof, solar generation, and actually open those environments up to multiple types of charging, and increase utilization is going to be really key. And then finally, before I finish and I pass on to my colleagues on the call, is a shared mobility model. What's fascinating is all across Europe, not all of us own a driveway, and driveway is a key barrier to that adopting an EV. but electrifying driveways and then creating a shared Airbnb of your driveway. There's plenty of opportunities, markets out there already, but that's going to be key to giving drivers confidence that there are charge points. It doesn't have to be on the lamppost outside your house. It can be community. And in fact, that benefits the community much better because it's not our councils and our governments having to pay for infrastructure on the road. It is our communities investing and getting a return from sharing that infrastructure that they invest in. So absolutely, for us, the key to scalability for mobility is going to be across driver user experience, opening up of energy markets, and co-location and automation of infrastructure. I hope that was concise enough.
Definitely concise, thank you, and definitely a lot of information there. I can't wait to delve into a few more of those topics at the end. But before that, we will be hearing from Roland Vanderput, who has a computer science background and has been with Fastned for 7 years. As Head of Network Technology, he's responsible for setting out the strategy for grid connections, fast chargers, local storage, load balancing, and integration with other systems and parties. Thanks very much for joining us, Roland.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Greta. So I hope my presentation is visible as well.
Yep.
I want to talk you to fast charging infrastructure and how that correlates to the grid, because that's our expertise basically. So we don't do any home charging, no office charging. So our perspective on the energy market and how we integrate with the grid is quite different than for, let's say, the AC charging poles that you find on the road, at home, and in the office. So we have to deal with that slightly differently. You may know Fastned of the stations, the yellow arced station or yellow shaped W stations. And our mission is to accelerate that whole transition to electric mobility. And the way our company was started 9 years ago was by what can we do in order to make electric driving easier. And the best way our founders could think of was to make it as easy as driving a fuel car at that time. And with the fuel car, you can just go anywhere you please. And if you run out of juice, you run out of petrol, you just go to a petrol station, you fill up in a couple of minutes, and you're good to go for several hundred kilometers. So what could we do in order to make that happen in the same easy manner for electric mobility as well? And that is to have fast charging infrastructure. So back 9 years ago, when Fastned was founded, 50 kilowatt chargers were considered, top notch. They just entered onto the market, and that allowed those early adopters of electric vehicles the freedom to drive around wherever they please. Of course, a lot has happened since then. So technology progressed, and the cars that are available also progressed a lot, and the whole market has changed, as also Robert outlined before me. So what is our goal? Our goal, in order to create this freedom for all electric drivers, is to build a European network of 1,000 stations. So currently we are at 142 as of today. And we have stations located in 6 countries, with country number 7, France, to be added to that list later this year. And we expect to have close to 200 stations at the end of this year, and cross the line of 250 next year. So that means we are basically setting up a good network in Northwestern Europe where you can drive around without having to worry where you can charge. And we are just one of those companies taking care of that freedom for electric drivers. So we have stations mainly located on highway locations, or at least where there's a lot of traffic, in order to cater for the demands of the electric vehicle drivers. So we are solely focused on fast charging. And what we often hear is that a single charger has a big effect on the grid. So if you are unaware of how the grid works and how fast charging works, this is your view of a fast charger. When someone plugs in, all of a sudden this charger starts taking 50, 100 or 200 kilowatt from the grid. And the grid magically supplies this energy. Of course, there's much more going behind that, but this is the general perspective of the public. But what's actually happening, in fact, is that it's not just a single charger, it's a whole bunch of chargers. When we started 9 years ago, we had 2 times 50 kilowatt chargers, but nowadays it's much more like 4 times 300 or even 8 times 300 kilowatt chargers. So the number of chargers has increased a lot. And this is our vision of the hopefully nearby future, is to have stations with 8 or even 16 fast charging points where people can fill up their car. And that also means that if you have multiple chargers behind one grid connection, you no longer get this spiky situation with just a single charger, but you get a much more smoother line with somewhat looks like this. So this graph gives you an idea of the sessions during the day and the breakdown in hours of the day when those sessions took place. And if you have not just a single charger or a dozen chargers, but hundreds of chargers, then you get a much more smoother line showing when people charge during the day. So having hundreds of chargers in a network allows us to predict when we need energy and also purchase this energy upfront from the suppliers of the renewable energy that we need. So in this way, having a fast charging network is far easier to integrate into the grid because the pattern that we have in terms of consumption is smooth and pretty predictable. Of course, it influences on the time on the day. So the pattern looks differently on a Monday than it is on a Sunday. It also looks different on a bad weather day with a lot of wind and a lot of cold temperatures rather than on a sunny day like today. But it is, in general, this pattern. And what's also very nice is that this pattern coincides a lot with solar. So this graph in yellow shows the solar production we have on our own solar panels. And each station is equipped with solar panels, but that's nowhere near enough to power all these electric vehicles. So we are reliant on the market to purchase energy. And initially, when we started Fastned, we had a fixed energy price. So we paid the same price regardless of the time of the day. But when we noticed that most people started charging in the afternoon, we changed it around. So now we purchase energy on the spot market. So when energy prices are as low as possible. Because in general, if there's a big influx of renewable energy, namely wind and solar, this mostly happens during the day. And so this coincides very nicely when people charge their car using our network, using fast chargers. So for us, it's a good thing that we see more and more renewable energy being fed into the grid. And particularly, we love solar energy because that peaks during the day and during the afternoon when our consumption is highest. So that brings down the prices of electricity that we need to pay. This also means that the so-called duck curve, so that means that there's a big influx of solar energy during the day, is lessened by the use of fast chargers. Because this is the typical pattern of fast chargers, which means that fast charging can absorb part of this solar production because it coincides in terms of time. Now, if you were to overlay this with a graph of when people charge at home or in the office, this is quite complementary to each other. So people tend to plug in when they come at home and start charging at 6 or 7 or 8 in the afternoon. And then using technologies like smart charging and so on, they may delay the start of their charging session until later in the evening when there's more capacity on the grid. So this is a nice supplement to what we do, is mainly charge cars during the day. So in order for us to make this all work, we need scale. First and foremost, we need to have many chargers. And we also have many grid connections because we are aiming for these 1,000 stations, which also means we will have 1,000 grid connections. But there are all kinds of local constraints as well. So the grid is under a lot of stress nowadays because of not only charging, but basically the electrification of everything and the influx of renewable energy. So we are dealing with a lot of limitations locally at a lot of our sites. So sometimes this might be a physical limitation. So we can't go above a certain limit indicated here by the red line. and we have to manage our use to ensure that at all times we stay below this red line. We also have other limits, let's say administrative limits imposed upon us by the grid operators. So then we have to stay below some kind of 15-minute value. And that's also something that we need to actively manage. Now, we are in a lot of discussions with grid operators because we want some flexibility. But right now, unfortunately, regulations are not very flexible. They are a couple of years behind what we really need in order to make this happen. So we are exploring the technologies that we can deploy at our stations and then discuss with grid operators and with regulators how we can use those technologies in order to better integrate fast charging stations into the electricity grid and eventually also help out in balancing that grid as more and more renewable energy is used. So our thinking is that fast charging can contribute to the matching the supply and demand on the electricity grid. And in particular, if a lot of solar is fed into the grid, then fast charging can help out by directly consuming that electricity. And we hope by using future technologies such as load balancing, but also using battery technologies, we are able to better help out stabilizing the grid, just like you can do with slow charging at home or in the office or along the street. So on that note, I want to stop my part and I look forward to the panel discussion.
Thanks very much, Roland. Very interesting. And we'll now go directly to our third speaker, Michael van Roeder, who is responsible for the IT infrastructure and digital transformation at Elia Group, leading the change from a conventional TSO to a digital company. Prior to Elia, Michael led many companies through transformations and restructuring, working at Vodafone, Accenture, Icon Mobile Group, and Vattenfall. He also teaches subjects on the Internet of Things at the HTW Berlin. Welcome, Michael, and please take it away.
Thank you very much. Now I'll try to share my screen. So I hope you can see it. First of all, thanks for the kind introduction. I have to say I'm in this job now for 1.5 years, so I'm new to the party. And my last job before was running my own startup. So you can imagine coming from a startup with 40 people to a TSO group, because Elia is in Belgium and in Eastern Germany, was quite a change. But it allows me to ask all those questions Rob and Roland have been asking. And, my job is to open this ecosystem up and create a proper ecosystem, which from my perspective, it is not yet. So what are we trying to contribute here? First of all, we published a paper in November 2020 exactly on the topic we're having today. So this fits pretty well. Let me start on the German side. So 50 Hertz is the TSO in Germany, so our German daughter. There we aim indeed to come to 100% renewables already by 2032. Which is quite ambitious. We already have more than 60% renewable in the grid. And as Roland has mentioned, balancing a grid with more and more renewables is indeed a challenge. And we believe it's only solvable when we work together in the whole ecosystem. And Rob mentioned, I always say it's two giants coming together, mobility and energy. You said it's three. I will steal that from you. So it's three, but they're not colliding. I think they're like, we're joining forces and create something really good. That's how I would look at it. And the TSOs obviously have to do their part. Yeah, we mentioned regulation already, which indeed is complex. And friends from me in the startup scene, many people currently found startups in the energy sector, and they tell me then, yeah, technology, I can do everything, and it's all awesome. And say, I found out technology is not the problem. Regulation is the big challenge, and change in the mindset of some of the incumbents. Yeah, if we're honest. And that's what I believe we need to get done. So when we look at that paper, we not only look at the technical part, but also, for instance, at what's the social relevance we need to look at when we want to align and have to align mobility and power sectors. we won't be able to decarbonize Europe and the planet without integrating those sectors. That is, I think, clear. And in doing so, we need to identify the enablers which give the consumers, and Rob talked a lot about user experience, and I couldn't agree more. At Vodafone, I was running a global user experience for a few years. Users don't care about how complex it is and what's behind it. Yeah, what they care about is that they can easily do it. And I give you a personal example. I drive a Tesla from my employer, and I want to charge at home. And I can charge at home, but that took 8 weeks to get that installed. And then I got a card. And I have a smart meter, but still, there's not a sub meter, but I charge on my normal power bill, and then I get reimbursed by energy, which is kind of a bit complex, yeah? And no way that I, for instance, could drive with my Tesla to Spain and use my solar power to charge my car. And that is where I want to go. That is the vision. So be able to take your car anywhere in Europe and charge it with your own energy. Yeah, that's what we have to figure out. And by the way, 6 days ago, we published an other vision on consumer-centric market design, which is exactly aiming at enabling that. So I think the three of us on this one, we for sure would agree. The question is how quickly can we go there and what needs to be done. If we look at, and I always look at Europe because I don't think this can be a national thing, which again, in the TSO, we know all TSOs are national, there's NSOE. Still, I believe there needs to be much more collaboration. We need to look at three enablers: physical infrastructure, we spoke about, grid, etc. But at the same time, the digital infrastructure. And if you look at the energy system, let's say the digital infrastructure needs some upgrading. Yeah, when we still sit on standards which are reliable, solid, but they're from the last century. And I've done the same in the telco industry 15, 20 years ago. We had exactly the same situation. And there I was told, you know, this internet thing, this is for amateurs and it's not going to stay. And we need, you know, protocols like SS7, all this kind of stuff. And obviously, as we all know, that is not the case. Everything is on the internet right now. And I firmly believe the same will happen and has to happen in the energy sector. So physical and digital infrastructure. Second, open data access. Right now, some people, they read a book about data is the new oil, and now they think they can sell data. That is obviously nonsense. You do not sell data. You share data. Data and knowledge are the only resource on the planet which get more when you share them. Yeah, when you share an apple, you have half an apple. When you share knowledge, you have double the knowledge. So we believe in sharing, and we believe this is also something we're obliged to do because, you know, we are a regulated monopoly. All of you pay us. So in the interest of society, we should give that back and open that whole sector up. And last but not least, we urgently need to work on the market rules to enable new consumer service. That is something we are pushing hard. I just mentioned we published a vision paper on this 6 days ago, and also obviously talked to the regulator and also to politics about this. However, I believe this will still be a way to go, but we have to start somewhere. Last but not least, how do we do this? I'm a firm believer in ecosystems. We cannot do this alone. And I'm not only talking about TSOs and DSOs. I'm talking about startups, incumbents, players from other industries, car manufacturers, and so on and so forth. Everybody needs to understand only with collaboration this will work. And unfortunately, the tendency of such new opportunities is that there's always market players who think they can, you know, close something up, lock people in, and that goes also, I hear from car manufacturers like, hey, but the battery in the car is ours, so we decide what the consumer can do with it. And I'm like, I bought the car, so it should be my battery, and I should decide as a consumer. And as an energy person, I'm saying, you know, cars are nothing else than batteries on wheels, yeah, which is for a TSO a difficult concept because first time an asset, which you could use for balance, I think Roland and Rob have spoken about this, which you could use for balancing is suddenly leaving my control zone, or it's not online. Yeah, we are used to assets which are always online or they're offline, like the big power plants. And now we have fluctuating supply and we have fluctuating assets for storage. So I believe, as I'm a product and tech guy, I think as a problem, this is a super interesting problem. But I also know we're not going to crack it alone. So we need the car manufacturers to open up their interfaces, their APIs. We need the charging guys to do their part, et cetera, et cetera. So what do we do? Obviously, grid planning has been mentioned. In Belgium, we are a TSO and DSO. So that's why on the slide it says we need to take care of the grid connection capacity in Belgium. In Germany, that's done by the DSOs, not by us. Here, our contribution as 50 Hertz is obviously to bring the green power from the Baltic Sea or from the huge solar power plants we have in Eastern Germany. Yeah, Eastern Germany has a lot of space. And as I mentioned, we already have 62% renewables, but we have at peak times more than 150% renewable in the grid. So we have to transport it to the south. Those are the big projects like Südlink and Südostlink. So that's one. Two, on metering and communication. I see that there's a lot of hurdles from regulation. There is still a debate on what kind of communication protocols should be used. There's then a debate, are they secure? What's with a blackout case, et cetera, I believe those are sometimes arguments which are technically not valid. So there are more arguments to keep the status quo. So we need to work on that. Third, we talked about it, shaping regulation. I think the TSOs are those, they're the big powerhouses to push the regulation, I would say. Yeah, that's easier for us than, let's say, for the startup guys. But I want to join forces with them because we all want to have the same. And last but not least, the market rules, and that starts on balancing reserve market. You know, the pre-qualification requirements are a huge hurdle. Yeah, I mean, I try to fill out that thing myself from my own company. It's a nightmare. It's based on regulation. This is not bad intention, to be clear. But I believe it's our duty to work on this to make it simpler. Yeah. On the other hand, as Greta said, I'm also responsible for IT. So I always fight with myself because I'm responsible for cybersecurity, IT stability. So if my IT doesn't work, we have a blackout in Europe. So, I have to balance that for myself a bit, to be honest. And the same goes for the market communication processes. And as I said, we want to go to a new regulation regime to enable a consumer-centric system. And with that, I do look forward to the discussion. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Michael. And now, Rob, you mentioned the democratization of energy a few times. Can you just take a step back, explain what you mean by that and why it's important and how it affects end users and various industry players?
Yeah, I think there's two angles to the democratization of energy. The first is, for example, the battery market. The price of batteries are going to come down dramatically because we have mobile phones in our hands and we have batteries in our cars, and we require batteries to balance the grid. And so just through the consumer's use of that resource, the price of that model and the availability of that technology becomes much, much more available to us. But then on the flip side, democratization of ownership needs to happen as well, and the ability to decide. And Michael was talking about it, the ability to decide where that power goes, whether I take it with me across Europe or whether I sell it to my neighbor, I give it for free to my family. And actually the challenge and the problem that we've got is that legislation really blocks that ability to use power in that way. We need blockchain technology to measure where it's turning up, but then the problem is the minute it leaves my meter and it travels 10 meters to my neighbor, I've got to pay the full stack of transmission grid costs for the entire market, and that's a major limiting factor. So democratization of energy from our perspective is the ownership of those green energy assets should be in the hands of consumers, not investors. The technologies that we use and we deploy should be those that are readily available and developing quickly. And then thirdly, the decision about how I consume my power and how I share that should be mine, not determined for me by my transmission system operator, my energy company, my vehicle manufacturer, or my distribution network operator.
Michael, do you agree with this? And if so, how do you think we can enable the democratization of energy?
I do agree in principle, because I think consumers should have choice. Where I'm struggling a bit, and everybody does grid fee bashing, and I understand that. However, my question then would be to Rob, who's paying for the long distance transport we need? Because you're not going to run the whole country or whole of Europe with microgrids. Yeah, you need power from large solar farms because of economies of scale. You need offshore wind. So all these things still need a transmission grid. 1, 2, balancing between microgrids needs a transmission grid. We all know that. So the question is, how do we finance that? And by the way, it's not only about my salary, it's about we have to do huge upgrades here on digital infrastructure as well. So that is a question I would like to ask. But other than that, I couldn't agree more. Yeah. So we see our role as opening up and enabling an ecosystem. I'm not going to do the user interfaces for stuff. I'm not going to write apps for that. I would expose APIs and stuff like that, and that's it. Yeah, that's in other roles. That because every player in the ecosystem has their strength, and if we, it requires a bit of trust. I recognize, everybody tries to find their position because there's a lot of money. It's a new sector. We just said 2 sectors or 3 sectors coming together. It's a natural thing that this happens. However, we have examples from other industries. I mentioned telecommunications. That's something where I come from. The telcos, the big telcos, the incumbents, they missed the boat to a certain extent. Today, they're more or less bit pipes. They claim they can do service, but let's be real. I mean, 20 years ago, everybody was writing SMS. Now everybody's writing WhatsApp, and that's not from the telco provider. So, but that was not done on a voluntarily basis. So here, I believe we need to enable that and go ahead of the curve and help shaping that ecosystem.
Yeah, and my view isn't that the transmission system operator isn't an integral part of that system. It's just that the mechanisms by which we pay for that system need to change and become more variable. And so, you talk about how do we pay for that? Well, in the UK, there's 400% of the potential kilowatt hours in the entire market as we need for all the EVs on the road by 2050. But the problem is that at the moment, we've got major grid constraints in peak periods in the morning and in the evening. And then secondly, we've got hyper-local grid constraints on distribution networks that cause problems for where we've got large amounts of solar generation in local areas that cannot get out of that grid onto other areas of the network. So we need to think more effectively about where technologies are combined and also user behavior is incentivized in order to make the model work much, much better. And therefore, that will then support the democratization of energy, we believe.
Yeah, if I may pitch in as well, Michael, you both referred to the rules which need to be changed as well. And right now, the rules have been created in the past century, and they were valid at that time, but they are totally working against us at this moment. Because we want to be more flexible and we want to accommodate the grid operator to help out match supply and demand and ensure we don't have any grid constraints. But we can't. So the regulations don't allow us to do that. And it would be super helpful if those constraints are lifted and we get more flexibility, because then you can solve problems using IT platforms instead of putting copper in the ground, which is a much more expensive solution. And we need that anyway, because then we have probably sufficient capacity on the grid in many cases. And, we will have more time in order to upgrade the grid where it's needed. And we will have to upgrade the grid, so that there's no doubt about it. But we can create a lot of space on the grid if we can be more flexible with the rules. So they have to change in order to do that.
And talking about the grid, we have a question from the audience. How can we make sure that grid fees are fairly distributed in the future? They mentioned that rich people can buy PVs, batteries, EVs, etc. Rob, what's your take on this?
You say rich people can buy PV and batteries, but the reality is that most of us use, we could go almost off grid for less than the price of upgrading our double glazing on our home at the moment, which is, so the price of this technology is coming down. The cost, how do we pay for the grid? That's the key question here, right? We've seen targeted charging review in the UK change the rules. Previously, in industry, my background was in large industry. We saw triad payments, which they took the 3 highest peaks in the winter, took the average of your peak consumption, and actually that almost became a potluck event. And I had a client who said to me, one day everyone's going to get all the 3 triads right, except for me, and I'm going to have to pay for the entire transmission system network. And so the way in which we think about distributing those costs more evenly across the network needs to be thought of, but actually it needs to be in line with use consumption. It's a demand-driven requirement. So if we can, there'll be peak periods. We already have peak energy costs, driving people out of those peak areas, making it fairer across a broader group of people in terms of the way in which we pay for that infrastructure is going to be key. But I'm fascinated to hear what Michael talks about, because that's a key thing for you, I think, is about how you're going to restructure the way in which we afford this grid and make it fairer for everyone.
First, this is a political question, not a technical question, right? And I'm an engineer. So today, the grid is being paid based on consumption. Yeah, you pay in Germany 7.34 cents per kilowatt hour for transmission or grid fees, distribution and transmission. But I understand the question, because obviously rich people can do own consumption with battery in the basement and solar, so they consume less from the grid. And poor people living in the city centers or like in the big houses, they can't do that. So the political thing on this is that socially fair or not? However, Rob, what you said, I think it is already based on consumption, so you don't question that system. Now you could discuss, is it 7 cents or 5 cents or 2 cents? That's a different debate. We could discuss that, but I don't think that is leading anywhere, which means if you want to socially make it more socially compatible, without questioning the mechanism that it's based on demand and grid usage in the end, then you need to redistribute it somehow. But that, again, is a political question I can't and don't want to answer.
Yeah, I think what may help is you also have to incentivize users of the grid to align their consumption with when there is space on the grid. Because right now, we are also measured on the highest 15-minute interval, and we end up paying for the next 12 months based on that interval. But maybe there wasn't an issue at all in the grid at that moment. So why would we then have to pay for the remainder of the year? Because that doesn't incentivize us to offload our users in peak times. So I totally agree. You need to pay for the usage of the grid, and we are happy to do that. But it would be better to align the goals of both grid operators and users of the grid, and that's not happening at the moment.
We've got to get passive consumers off the network. Passive consumers need to be incentivized to integrate with that network in order to support it. And so the model where you sit at home and you consume power, it has to go, because you have to be a proactive consumer in that environment in order to achieve lower costs. And we've already proven it with Agile in the United Kingdom. We provide our consumers with 48 prices in a 24-hour period, a day ahead. And we've seen, the average consumer shift 27% of their peak load out of peak periods, and EV drivers shift 47% of their peak load out of peak periods. And so it's that kind of 5 pence bag tax model. I've walked home from the supermarket carrying milk and bread under my arm because I don't want to pay the tax on the bag. And so we need to either put higher prices in periods where grid constraints are maximized, or incentivize consumers to use power when it's available. And so the second tariff we launched was a tariff called the Fan Club tariff. So if you live down the road from a wind turbine and you can see it spinning, we'll give you 20% off your energy. And if it's more than 15 miles an hour of wind outside, you get your energy prices slashed by 50%. And that's the type of thing that we need to start to encourage, is proactive management of our own energy and automation of charging. Plug in, go to bed. Let us make sure it's the cheapest possible way to get the miles that you need tomorrow. And by the way, we'll take it all of the problem. We'll help the grid and support the grid at that period. So we need to be proactive consumers. We need to be working in unison in order to unlock that value that we're worried about.
I couldn't agree more. And again, please feel free to check that vision paper on consumer centricity. That's exactly what we're proposing. So we need to provide price signals, real-time price signals to consumers, so that they can then decide, do they consume or not? Although I believe there's a second part, and that's something now the commercial block for my old company. You need a mini EMS in your basement, which receives those price signals and then decides what to do. So I even believe that. There you go. Let's say the house receives a price signal. There's lots of solar power, wind power in the grid. Then you charge your car, or you start your heat pump, or whatever you do. That should be automatic. Again, Rob, you said it. User experience is super important, and maybe us nerds and geeks do that manually, but after a while it gets boring. So I'd like to automate that. So you need price signals from the grid. 1, mm-hmm. 2. I love that you offer those tariffs without those price signals. So that's awesome, because we get people used to the fact. And I think that's very important. Then the question is still, how fast can we get to that? Because technically, this is as we know, doable. We just need to convince regulation and politics. I give an example. We tried in Germany, there was a discussion that, the DSOs can up to 2 hours switch off the charging when there's grid congestions. And there was a huge debate. How can the DSO switch off the power for me type of stuff? So you see there's sensitivities, at least in politics. And I believe this is because they, we need to do a bit of education around that this is not about taking control away from the consumer, but more about, enabling the consumer and encouraging the consumer to behave in a way that it, eases the grid load. And that makes the whole thing cheaper.
And those price signals need to go all the way down the network. We can't just talk about them being in our homes. They need to be at our businesses, and
everywhere.
They need to be at Roland's Fastned as well. Because high consumption on the grid, constraints on the grid, it coincides with loads of vehicles on the road. And so actually, if you shift your charging to an alternate period, you can access cheaper prices. And so pricing everywhere, and almost, again, an energy passport. So you can take data from where you charge on the road, at home, at work, consolidate that, and then educate and gamify it in order for people to change their behavior.
Yeah.
A viewer asked, so does that mean that dynamic capacity tariffs are the future?
Yeah, in my view, they are, because then you can steer behavior of consumers, both small consumers, but also like us. And it's not only about tariffs, because tariffs is just one way to incentivize users to adjust their behavior. But if you look at it from our perspective, we often face constraints on the grid, and we can't really steer our customer behavior a lot, only to a certain extent. But if you have more flexible capacity on our grid connections, that would already help a lot. So if, for example, if we get 500 kilowatts available as a basis, but if we, based on the signal of the grid operator, can sometimes use 800 kilowatt or 1,000 kilowatt during off-peak hours, that could really help us sell more electricity on those locations. And then if there are any issues in the grid, locally in the grid, then the grid operator just sends a signal to go back to 500 kilowatt, and we'll be happy to work with it. Because right now we are imposed with a hard limit of 500 kilowatt, no matter the time of the day and no matter the day of the week. While these peaks only happen maybe a few times a month or 1 or twice a week, and we'll be happy to accommodate the grid by reducing our power usage. But in order to do that, we like to use more when we can. And so then it's not about pricing, because pricing is only a small part of it. It's about making these limits, which are fixed today, more dynamically. And that already contributes a lot in my view.
May I ask, because I'm trying to get my head around that. So that would mean that you either need local battery buffers, or it means you have assets which you can't use because, you have, let's say, 10 charging poles and then you can only use 8. And when we have more power, you use 10, or you charge slower. And I'm asking for a friend.
Yeah, so it means that we need to steer our assets. So we can already do load balancing on our chargers. So depending on how much grid capacity we have, we can set the parameter higher or lower. So that's something that we are rolling out as of now. Of course, we can also put batteries on sites. And then depending on the signals that we get, we can use our batteries to fill them up in order to prepare for times of peaks, both in our charging infrastructure, but also constraints in the grid. And then basically help to make the experience for our customers as good as possible. So yeah, for us, right now, we're stuck with, for instance, 500 kilowatts. So we can only install 3 chargers and nothing more. But if the grid operator allows us to use more during off-peak hours, we can install a 4th or a 5th charger. And that would allow us to sell more electricity. And that's better than being stuck with just 3 chargers that we have today. And that's the situation that happens more. We can't expand where we want to expand. And we're happy to expand under some conditions, namely that we have to reduce the total output to the chargers at some peak times, but we're happy to accept that over not expanding our stations.
Because you have more, so the bottleneck is the number of parallel charging cars charging, and not so much. Is that? I'm not sure, because if you have buffer at your charging stations, why would you have to why would you need more power? Because you fill it with 500 kilowatts, and if more people are coming, you just use the buffer. And otherwise, again, the business case of having assets sitting around and just for non-peak hours where the grid allows more load, I'm not sure if I can follow, to be honest.
Yeah, it all depends on the price. The price for a battery buffer is relatively high nowadays. So it's not economically feasible to install a big battery, let's say a Tesla Megapack or something like that, because that costs you €500,000, €1 million. So that's not feasible. That's not a big business case. But being able to use all chargers maybe 95% of the time and being only constrained 5% of the time, that's still a good deal. But of course, you need to find the balance. And that's what we're looking for. Because now we are constrained 100% of the time. And that's the total opposite of being constrained maybe 5% of the time.
You talk about dynamic tariffs being the future. I think actually dynamic tariffs are already the present. We've been doing them for 5 years. And interestingly, the way in which there's a kind of step before that, which is energy suppliers and in general, grid operators use technology platforms that were built 20 years ago. And so they don't have the flexibility, they don't have the molecules inside them that you could put together to create the solutions for the existing market. So actually there's an entire kind of technical revolution that needs to happen within the management platforms and the customer service platforms of the energy companies. And, we talked about E.ON Next taking Kraken from Octopus, but, we've got like 16 energy companies on that platform now. And also included in that, you can send someone a signal for 48 prices for tomorrow. That's great. But actually in real time, those are different. And also post-gate, they're different. So for this half hour, 2:30 till 3 o'clock, I know at 22 minutes past 3 whether or not there was an opportunity that I should have taken advantage of in this half hour in this market. Now, it differs across all energy markets, but the challenge we've got is that you've got ahead trading, you've got intraday trading, and you've got imbalance, plus all the grid's ancillary services and management platforms, and all of those are price signals. Now, all we need users to do at the other end is say, I'm willing to do X if the price signal is Y, or the benefit is Y. And so once you've got that ability and you've got that control and that trust of that customer, because trust is key in the energy market as well, then you've got so much more freedom to provide them with cheaper, easier energy experiences, and also that they trust that their homes are going to be warm, that their hot water is going to come out the tap hot, and that their EV is going to get them to work or to school in the morning. And all of those things are underpinned by the technology that exists in the market today. It's not integrated and it's not fit for purpose.
I couldn't agree more. And now you described my work plan for the next 3 years, I guess. So what did I find? I found an IT landscape of legacy monolith connected like spaghetti, where it's really hard to make changes, which is no one's fault. It's just how it grew over the past 20 years, as you described it. The other thing I found is a software supplier ecosystem, which has the same. So they also have spaghetti and monoliths, and that is the challenge. And that's the reason why the first thing I'm doing now is we will write our own system operations platform together with suppliers who are willing to contribute, but they're not going to look the Siemens or ABB or GE, not going to sell me for whatever million fully integrated monolith where I have no access whatsoever. They don't expose APIs properly. So we're going to move to a microservice architecture with fully exposed APIs. However, I'm sure you can appreciate, I'm not a startup and I have to keep the lights on at the same time. So I can't just rip everything out, tell everybody, okay, we have 2 years blackout while I build a new system. I have to run the current system at the same time, build a new one. And you spoke about trust. Yeah, if the TSO screws up, you have a problem too. I'm looking for people who are supporting us in that and contribute. We are opening this up. We work with other TSOs already on this, and there's movement in the market. What frustrates me, to be honest, I see that movement and awesome. So next year we're going to have the first results. It's in the energy sector, things take longer than I like them to take. However, that is exactly the right direction. You mentioned also other systems, but I think the core systems need to be enabled to interact with other platforms first and foremost, and to have the flexibility to make those changes. Right now, my IT is busy to follow all the legal changes every year, regulatory changes in the legacy systems, and there's a huge tech debt. everybody has it, so it's not a secret. And the IT guys amongst us, they know if you have a high tech debt, you get for this €1, you get much less new functionality than when you don't have a tech debt. So we need to address this indeed.
And everybody takes the system, buys it off the market, and then tries to make it bespoke to them because they think, being an energy provider makes them a technology company, and that's not true. And so even when you've got the same system in multiple energy providers or transmission network operators, there's tweaks that makes it worse because it's even less interoperable.
I'm not going to tell you how long an upgrade takes. Yes, worse than SAP. It's worse than SAP. But I think technology. Well, my TSO will become a tech company. Yeah. I could even say maybe a software company to a certain extent. Yeah. Why? Because the core business is to run the transmission grid, and that will be software enabled more and more. So we better understand how the software works in-house and not rely on some vendors who themselves have monoliths, which are really with a high tech debt. Yeah. And plus they drive prices through the oligopoly. Let's say there's some room for improvement.
And just to cut in, final question. Sorry. What are the major barriers to vehicle to grid and vehicle to home technology, and how can we overcome them?
First of all, price. Right now, it's price of the technology. £4,500 for a V2G charger versus non-subsidised £1,000 for a home charger. And if you employ a V2G charger, you can capture 60% of the value from smart charging, but unidirectionally. So you're only adding 40% of the value on for a bit of asset that costs 4 times as much. That's one. And for me, two, again, who's sending the price signals and what am I responding to? Do I respond to a DNO or a TSO, or do I respond to my energy provider? Who's in control of that, and who do I give that? Because everybody now wants a piece of it, that pie all the way up the chain. Your charge point provider, intelligent charge point providers wants to be an aggregator. Your IDNO wants to control you to balance the grid, and your TSO wants to make sure that your frequency is on the grid is working properly. And so, they're the two barriers from my point of view.
I agree. I think the TSO should send the price signals, and there's very good technical reasons for that. And that does not mean we make money with that. Yeah, that's a different discussion. But technically, and I think we should look first and foremost from a technical perspective, what is the right thing to do? And then you can have a debate what's fair and who has which power and which lobby is where. That's a separate debate. But I'd like to have pure technical discussions first. And there, I'm sure, Rob, we agree that it makes sense if you want to keep the frequency and you want to balance large areas. It makes sense to send price signals, ideally in a European system.
Roland, any final words?
Yeah, I want to tell Michael indeed that he probably has to become a tech company. And becoming a tech company is probably easier still. It's a hard job, but it's probably easier than upgrading the entire transmission system from the local home to the main transmission lines and the interconnections between countries, because that's a much harder job that will take even more time. And we don't have that time if we want to have more renewable energy on the grid. So, although it's a tough job, becoming a tech company and working in the ecosystem with others like us, with Rob, and many out there in Europe is the only way, only path I can see in order to reach net zero in 2050. Yeah,
I agree. And by the way, we have a hackathon mid of October in Brussels for you guys to work on price signals. So we provide the real-time stuff and then we can try it out, because I also believe talking about this is awesome, but just doing it is much better in terms of an MVP. So let's do this.
Yeah, you bet.
Unfortunately, we're already over time. I think we could easily do a round 2 of this discussion. We've still got a lot of audience questions that unfortunately weren't answered, but maybe we can chat with you guys again after. But I think we made a lot of ground there, and I agree doing is more important. It's the next step. So thank you for taking the time and having a really great discussion.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Greta. Cheers.
Cheers.
Yeah, bye.